Lalu seperti apa jurus literasi keuangan yang disiapkan pelaku usaha startup Fintech di Indonesia akan kita bahas bersama dengan Markus Promik, co-founder and CEO Finfra. Markus, thank you for joining our show.
Glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but in 2022, an Estonian guy established a startup Fintech for Indonesia in Singapore. Am I correct?
Factually correct, but the story goes a bit longer back in the history.
Please spill for us.
Yeah, sure. As you mentioned, originally from Estonia, which is a small, cold country in Northern Europe, I moved to Indonesia in 2016. And that's where we first launched a fintech business for consumers called DanaBijak, which is also licensed by OJK under the peer-to-peer lending regulation. And as we grew the business, we also realized that the bigger problem is actually access to credit for the UMKM or micro and small businesses. So in 2022, we established a business, Finfra. It's established in Singapore, where we also have a small part of the team. But the main purpose of Finfra is to actually promote access to financial services and access to credit to the small businesses and merchants and UMKM owners.
So you've built another fintech before, and what happened with DanaBijak?
DanaBijak, it's an ongoing business, and Finfra is, I would say, an additional layer on there. And it's more of switching from the consumer to UMKM, because that's where we see there's a bigger potential in access to credit for Indonesian business owners.
Speaking about Finfra is already 2 years old now, which is relatively young. And what is the potential that you see for Finfra?
It's a good question, right? Sky is the limit in a way. But when we look at if you look at the Indonesian economy, right, there's 64 million MSMEs or UMKM. And over the past 8 years, there's been a lot of investment and purposeful activities by the government and private enterprises to digitize those companies. Based on the data, right now about 24 million of those MSMEs are already digital, which means they have a digital footprint. By end of this or next year, that's expected to grow by another 25% to 30 million MSMEs. So the digitization happening in Indonesia for UMKM, it's happening at a rapid and very high growth pace. So if we see those trends, that helps a lot of those UMKMs to leave behind a digital footprint that can open up doors for sustainable financing and sustainable access to credit.
What kind of digital footprints that you mean? Because scoring is still a problem in MSMEs or UMKM. How can you be so optimistic about that?
Yeah, if you look at the digital footprint and if you look at the data, right, and what the overall digitization has allowed us to do, it's many of those many of the UMKM, they sell now on Tokopedia or Shopee, or many business owners do business-to-business sales on platforms like GoCement, which is, for example, offering, it's a merchant digital platform for construction materials. And they're leaving behind digital transaction, which was previously maybe in their notebook, which they wrote down in handwriting, and it was very difficult to analyze. But those digital transactions give Finfra and other fintech platforms an ability to analyze them, see their future revenues, see how much they're actually selling, which is a validated transaction. And this will definitely help to build that footprint and the persona of that small business.
So basically your focus is more to P2P lending for business to business compared to for a consumer?
Correct. So we are focused on business to business. 80% of our volumes are for businesses. And we see that growing rapidly. And we do see that with the kind of latest developments over the past 8 years, where the digital ecosystem in Indonesia has been booming, that has created that solid fundamentals for companies like Finfra to build access to financial services on top of that.
Do you see it as a heavy risk business, P2P lending for B2B, or it's actually not that big?
it's a very good and complicated question to answer. I think risk always is a question of how to mitigate it. And if we look at, for example, some models which have come up, as I mentioned before, credit scoring based on transactional data, or very common right now, what we can see is a supply chain financing from principals to distributors and retailers through the value chain of supply chain. And that data, what has been graded there, and some opportunities for closed loop systems, like principal making a payment on behalf of the distributor to the lender, right? All of those things actually are there to reduce the risk and find ways how to provide access to sustainable financing to those UMKM.
So are you going to focus to only big countries, I mean big cities in Indonesia, or it will go to small cities too?
Since we're working in a structure where we integrate with already existing digital platforms like Mekari or GoCement, a lot of our volumes will be driven by where their merchants and users are based. While today we see most of the volumes coming from equally from NTT and Java, but more and more we're looking we're seeing more demand coming in from Sulawesi Island and East Indonesia. That said, of course, it's going to be a question of demand and education, digital adoption across those different areas, because we are primarily a digital first business.
You were mentioned about education. Then we back to OJK focus is to increase our literacy in financial. And what is your plan to support that goal from OJK?
I think that OJK has been done great work on promoting financial education and literacy. They have a different department for it, and as we work, and as most fintech platforms even, they organize quarterly, monthly events with their merchants, with their users, to focus on education. And I think that work is slowly starting to bear fruit, in a way, if you can say that. And especially if we work with more in remote areas and underserved communities, it's an effort we must do as combined industry and stakeholders to improve and increase that literacy and education.
How big is the effort to spread literacy in Indonesia?
Yeah, I think the question is, I think the answer to that depends on what shapes and forms, right? So to do it with merchants that are already digital, that's definitely easier, as that allows you to do a lot of digital distribution, less manual work. But it also requires seminars, talk events, and so on. Even back in the days with the previous business, 5 years ago, 2018, I've been to Jogja, having 2 days with seminars in universities and so on. So it definitely takes time and effort, but I think it's worth to invest in there.